will go up and let's see what happens.
Well, say now you. There you go.
Am I live?
Yeah, you should be.
Okay.
Yeah, see, this is good now. So just
Am I all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just it'll start showing people popping in.
Okay. Just will you lock it from the outside?
Yeah.
All right.
You're on here.
All right. I'm hoping that you're here. We had a little trouble getting on. I have no idea what the problem was, but my son came in and I think he helped fix it. So we're just going to get going. I'm excited to spend some time with you about the semiotics of Pentecost, and I try to set it up with Hannah's song and Mary's song, and see both Hannah as a Mary whisperer and to set it up for this huge event in the Christian calendar, which is Pentecost. The birthday of the church is what we celebrate, is the birthday of the church at Pentecost. But we've got to go back to tell any one story to some degree. You've got to tell the whole story. And it's like if you treat the Bible as not 66 separated books with each one going off in a different direction, but if you treat it as one organism, like your body is one organism, as one story, which is what I like to do semiotically, which I think is the right way to do it, then you can start anywhere. And it has, just like your body, anywhere you start, it has the DNA encoded of your original kind of blueprint. And the original design is in every cell of your body. So the original DNA is everywhere. And of course, we have all sorts of TV shows based on, that, finding just a piece of hair and getting the DNA and solving a crime. So every single story has the original DNA. So in some ways, to understand every single story, like Pentecost, which is a big deal, we've got to kind of reacquaint ourselves with the DNA story, our Genesis story. And here, the two key stories that are important to understand Pentecost is the creation of Adam, and then the whole Mount Sinai event. And in many ways, the Jewish festival of weeks was really kept as a commemoration of Moses' receiving the divine law on Sinai. So the whole backdrop of Pentecost is this festival of weeks, and which is 50 days after Easter. Now, this is a huge number, 49, 7 times 7, perfect numbers, plus 1. In other words, you're in a whole new reality. When you add that 1, it's called Jubilee. And Dr. Jonathan Esterman, one of my semiotic students, has a great podcast on the significance of 50, and it's listed and linked on the announcement where I made to this podcast. So we have, in many ways, I think the best way to define kingdom, everybody's, how do we define kingdom? It's Jesus' Jubilee. When Jesus reads in the temple about he's coming to fulfill and bring the day of the Lord's favor. The day of the Lord's favor is shorthand for Jubilee. So the kingdom is Jesus' Jubilee. 50, when everything starts over again, everything begins again, everything is whole and new and fresh. And that's what the kingdom is. It's Jesus' Jubilee. So we've got this understanding here of Pentecost within the context of these two stories. So let's go back to these two stories really quickly so we can understand the semiotics right. First time we meet God in the Bible, Genesis 2 is earlier than Genesis 1. The particular comes before the universal, the micro before the macro. In the second creation account, the first time we meet God, God is playing in the mud. This is God's scooping dirt out of the ground that had been. So the first metaphor of the Bible is earth, dirt. Second metaphor of the Bible is water. But the water, so you don't get rain until Noah. Water wells up from within. And so from within the ground, it wells up. And God, when you mix dirt and water together, you get mud. So here we meet God, creating you and I in the divine image, male and female created them, and scooping us out of the ground, this clump, we are clumps of clay that God molds. So the first introduction we have to God is both playing in the mud and this divine potter, an artist, an artist. And so God molds us and fashions us into the divine image, but we do not become a living human, a living soul, a living creature until you have the third application, the third metaphor. Dirt, water, but you need wind. And God breathed into Adam the breath of life. Now, this is huge. Because what makes us human is the divine breath. I cannot say this enough. What makes a human human is the divine. In other words, you can't be human without the divine. Animals have breath, but it's not the divine breath. We are breathed into us. We have breathed into us. And the first Adam is created as a whole human, male and female. So we got a whole human here. But the key image here is the breath, the wind. Now, immediately after God creates humans, God creates trees. So you know from the story, you don't read the Bible for biology, but you trust the story. And the story tells us that key to human destiny are trees for a reason. Now, these writers don't know photosynthesis, they don't know, but this is under the inspiration of the Spirit, and they sense things, they know things, and so we share a common destiny. And so immediately God creates humans, and God creates trees, a garden, and we know now that the breath that we breathe out is CO2, which is toxic, but trees' life breath is the CO2. That's what they need to live, and they breathe out what is toxic for them, which is oxygen. So we have this huge symbiotic relationship with trees, and you cut down trees, you're cutting down your own lungs. So we early on, but there's one tree in particular that describes all these trees filled with fruit, trees just for beauty, but then it mentions two in particular: the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, don't go there, but all these other trees, and symbolized by the tree of life. And what is the significance of that tree of life? That's the continuing breathing of the divine breath into Adam that makes us a whole human, a real human, because you can't be human without the divine. So that tree of life, the divine breath, is constantly breathing into our nostrils through that tree of life. So the separation from the garden is not so much the garden we're separated from, it's that tree of life that we have through our Creator that we now have been separated from. So that's when we begin all of the fall, the labor, all the problems. So we have the initial breathing. Now, first negative note in the Bible, God says it's not good that Adam, a whole human, be alone. I've got to make an Ezer, E-Z-E-R. 21 times in the Bible that's used. 14 of the 21 times it refers to God. This is as high a doctrine of the creation of woman as you can get. And so God, what does God do? God splits the atom, and out of the side is conceived a bride. So the bride comes from the side. And the side of Adam bursts this. Now we have gender. We have male and female. We have Adam and Eve. But it's from the side that a bride is conceived. Okay, now we got to hold that for a minute. Because I want to read the Sinai Text. And so let me just do that with you. And just one in particular, because this is the other backdrop to Pentecost. And I'll bring them together. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood in the font at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke. This is Moses' smoking mountain here. Because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. And Moses spoke, and the voice of God entered him. Okay, so now let's put these two together. So you've got creation story, creation of Adam, God's breathing, and then you've got Sinai, the backdrop, the Feast of Weeks, which is being celebrated. That's what they call Pentecost. Pentecost is the celebration of Sinai. So here we have the first. So you don't, from the side comes the bride. Now we know, why is this significant? Well, Jesus did not die crucifixion. You all know that, right? I mean, he was on the cross only 6 hours. Crucifixion kills you slowly over many days. And Jesus died very, very quickly. We know what he died of because when they split his side, okay, what issued from his side was blood and water. And that means really that he kind of popped, we'd say today, he popped an aorta. His heart burst. He died of literally a broken heart. And he himself said, "You did not kill me. I laid down my life for you." He did not die of crucifixion. He died of a broken heart. But now, I'm not giving you Leonard Sweet. I'm giving you the early church fathers. Okay. But you see, when the side was split of the second Adam, the last Adam, a bride was conceived. Now, it wasn't born yet. It was only conceived because to be born, you need the breath. If it is to be the bride of the last Adam, as the bride of the first Adam, if it's to be the bride of the last Adam, it needs that divine breath. So, but at the cross, out of the side being split of the last Adam, a bride, the church, is conceived. But it isn't born. But there is an initial quickening. What does Jesus do when he meets one of his post-resurrection appearances with his disciples? He meets with them they're all, locked in a room, and he appears to them. And in the course of that appearance, what does he do? He breathes on them. Okay. He breathes some of that resurrection breath, those resurrection energies. He quickens the gestation of this conception that took place at Calvary. And here we have 50 days later, from that moment when it was conceived, a Jubilee day, we have the birthday of the church, because here is when the church is born. Not just conceived, not just quickened, but it's conceived. And the three symbols we have for that birth of the church, Pentecost, the three symbols we have are the wind, the breath. And it's not just a little breathing now. It is a huge sound of a rushing mighty wind. And then we have the fire. And then we have the tongues here, but then the tongues here. And everyone, and it names 15 nations here, so at least we have 15 languages. There may have been many more, but at least we know there were 15 languages where everybody heard and could understand one another perfectly, even though they were speaking in different languages. Everybody could hear one another and understand one another. See, God does unity out of diversity. God does not do unity out of uniformity. This is huge. This is the relationship between the diversity and unity and particularity and universality. It's a huge issue here. So we have three signs of the manifestation, but the first one, notice the first one, is the wind, the sound. Now, if you read this carefully, and this is gonna just calm down a little bit, just stay with me when you hear this. It doesn't say there was wind. Okay, I mean they're in a room. You imagine if the big rushing mighty wind came and filled that room and then went out from there and filled the space. Everybody's hair is blown and their skirts are everywhere and their togas are, no. It says the sound of a rushing mighty wind. The sound of a rushing mighty wind. Which is even more to me semiotically significant because everybody's looking around. Where's the wind? Where's the wind? Because we're hearing it. It's everywhere. But this is see, it's Jubilee. You're beyond the normal. You're beyond the real. You're 7 times 7 plus the intangible, plus the miraculous, the mysterious, the magical. So you're hearing first the sound. And I cannot say this enough. This is where the whole leadership stuff went awry, I think, the last 30, 40 years. It's all about vision. It's all about the eye. No, in a biblical sense, you don't see a vision first. You hear it. Sound comes before sight. Vibration comes before vision. The first manifestation of the Spirit at Pentecost is the sound. Then you get the sight. I mean, creation. And God said, sound, let there be light. Sight. But sound comes before sight. Read the story of the burning bush. Moses heard it before he saw it. So a vision, if it's your vision, chances are you're going to see it because our eyes are very deceitful. That's why God gave us eyelids, because we create illusions, we create mirages, we bring things into how we want them to be. So our eyes take us into the world. Your ears, you can't trust your eyes, but you can trust your ears because your ears take the world into you. Faith comes by hearing. So the first manifestation of the Spirit is sound. And then that sound becomes sight, becomes the tongues of fire. So let's get this right. It's a big sound, rushing mighty sound. The wind seems to be everywhere, but I mean, everybody's looking around going, where's the wind? Because we're sure hearing it. And now this is important, and I'm going to leave you with uncertainty here because there's two basic interpretations. And frankly, I have a favorite, but I cannot say that that's the right one. It is very clear in the Greek here that these tongues of fire, now the King James, I love all the King James translate, cloven tongues of fire. Okay, cloven, like cloven hoofs. And that has all sorts of implications for what is kosher and what isn't, all that stuff. But cloven tongues of fire, which puts an image almost of feet on your head. And there's a reason for this, I think, but we'll get to that in a minute. But this is huge. So either they're tongues of fire that are tied at the bottom but separated, or they are totally distinct. In other words, two tongues of fire. And you got to go one of two ways here, however you decide on which way it is. If they are two distinct flames of fire, tongues of fire, which is prophetically saying what's going to happen next as your tongues becomes, remember, because this is all about preparation for being witnesses. You should be my witnesses. And our tongues have been touched as Jeremiah's tongue was touched by the fires of the Almighty. And by the way, if you've been touched by the fires of the Almighty, you need to be fired up. And that's what Pentecost does. It fires up the church. It just doesn't found the church. It fires it up. It gives it the wind. It gives it the fire. And it gives it the ability to communicate in all the languages of the world. So here we have this amazing image that first of all, most people miss, but when they do get it, nobody can figure out, is it Are they cloven like this? Or are they totally distinct, separated? If they're separated, really, I think what's going on here is the image of the two tablets. Moses comes down. He's got two tablets of stone with letter and law. We have here at the birthday of the church two tablets, but not of stone, but tablets of fire that are engraved in the heart, on both sides of the heart. Not letter and law, but spirit and grace, spirit and truth. And with that, we are to go out into the world, not clinging to stone tablets, because the law now has become spirit, engraved, inscribed on the human heart. Spirit and grace, not letter and law. Spirit and grace, spirit and truth. If they are more cloven, if the image here is much more of an image that is accenting what does it mean to be witnesses, both wind is a motion image and fire is a motion image. So you have this missional founding images. The mission of the church is bathed in the very beginning in these images of movement and motion. And the church exists not to stand still, but to move forward and to be in mission and in motion. Now, there's also a Jewish tradition that King David was born and died on the Festival of Weeks, and in other words, Pentecost. And so that's why you shouldn't be surprised later on, as Peter is preaching here in Acts 2, why he directly relates the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus to King David's death, burial, and hope for life after death. In other words, a way of saying that we are part of the same story, we're continuing the same story, and we're proud of the same story. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you are to be my witnesses. And the semiotics of what it means to be this witness are right here in this text. They are effective witnesses of this encounter and are able to testify to it. And it's one thing to experience something, but it's another thing to testify to what you've experienced. And that's the importance of the tongues part here. You know, they've experienced the wind, they've experienced the fire, but they've not just experienced Pentecost. They're able now to testify to it. I call it the breeze and the blaze. Empower them, embolden them to be the flaming tongues of fire for witnessing to who Christ is. When the world talks about flaming, it's not. It has a very different meaning than we do. The flaming that we get when you go and tweet something and you get flamed, or you post something and you get flamed, it brings hatred and destruction. The flaming of the Spirit brings just the opposite. And too often, however, the church, in its witnessing, has has encouraged the wrong kind of flaming. And so we need the right kind of flaming. I have a poem here that I copied. It's from William Blake. It's one of my favorites, and I just thought I'd read it to you. What it means for Christians to flame is to be on fire and set people on fire and get them passionate about life and about God and the gospel. So, the world's flaming results in arguments, fights. Jesus' flaming results in love, not just love, but incandescent love. Incandescent love. So here's William Blake talking about Pentecost. He didn't title his poem this, but I call it Great Balls of Fire. That's the title I give William Blake's poem. Unless the eye catch fire, then God will not be seen. Unless the ear catch fire, then God will not be heard. Unless the tongue catch fire, then God will not be named. Unless the heart catch fire, then God will not be loved. Unless the mind catch fire, then God will not be known. Isn't that great? So I pray for you as you preach to your people on Pentecost that the eye, the ear, the tongue, the mouth, the heart, and the mind will all catch fire, that your people will catch fire and will flame the world, not with hatred, but with love. Not with argument, but with affection and admiration and understanding. And our feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. I mean, this is why, if it is cloven, I mean, you got your feet on your head here. I mean, in other words, from the very beginning, you're in motion. Your feet have better be shod. They better be shod properly, and with the preparation of the gospel of peace. If I were preaching this, I'm going to close here in a minute, and then we can talk a bit. But I might want to talk about firewalls. And you could do a whole sermon on this, or you just might want to just play a little bit with it at the end. But we put up some firewalls to prevent catching fire, to prevent the fresh fire, to prevent the firestorms of the Spirit. And the biggest one, and I'll just, you could do 2, 3, 1, whatever. People love lists, so give them a list maybe. But the biggest one, you don't set something on fire without losing your control of that situation to some degree. Now, every fire needs a fireplace. So, and I have some Pentecostal friends. I just keep reminding them, every fire needs a fireplace. If you don't have a fireplace, you burn the house down. But these firewalls that prevent us, one of the biggest is control. We have got to be in control. We want to be in control of our own lives, and to allow yourself to catch fire, to be consumed by the Spirit, to be caught up in this firestorm of Pentecost. You got to let go. And that's the importance of Hannah's prayer and Mary's prayer that I talked about in the vlog. You got to let go. You got to allow yourself to go out of control. You got to trust and control the Spirit and give up your own control. And this is one of the biggest firewalls I see in the church. Sisters and brothers, we've got our firewalls up. One of the big firewalls in every denomination is, I call it, St. Robert's Rules of Order. That is a firewall. You try and get through the Spirit to penetrate St. Robert's Rules of Order. I mean, you got St. Peter's Rules of the Spirit. They can't even penetrate St. Robert's Rules of Order, because everything's got to be under control. No, you got to let to start a fire, you got to lose a little control. So just lose it. Just lose it. You never ride a bicycle unless you let yourself go out of control. You find out that once you give up your control, suddenly you got a whole new kind of control. It's a control that brings new meaning and excitement and purpose to life, but you got to first say, I surrender all. I give up my control. Here it is, Lord. I am yours. So a few little reflections on the Pentecost theme, the semiotics of Pentecost. I could say a lot more, but let me just try and see if anybody has anything to ask here. Or I see we have people from all over the world. That's great. We got Johannesburg and Canada and Brazil and Italy, and this is great. So, y'all are having trouble hearing me. Is that it? Was that a problem? I said very hard to hear. I'm sorry about that. I should have tried to find a way to step it up a bit. What's that? Good visual and audio here. Okay, good. All right. Well, it's great to be with you. Let's. I'll do these periodically, and I'll try and find a way to up the volume. So some of you, it looked like you had no problem hearing me. Some of you did, but some of the semiotics of Pentecost.